When you look at the defensive end position for this Oregon football roster right now, I see it as probably the biggest glaring weakness on either side of the ball. Now, depending on how you feel about Bo Nix, you might think it's quarterback or the receivers are kind of unproven. You could make a case here or there, but there are only two edge players listed on the roster, Ryan. One of them is Brandon Dorlus, who we know plays primarily between the tackles. So Braden Swinson is sort of the Ducks' only defensive end or guy who is going to get after the passer off the edge. He's a 3-star recruit. I thought he kind of played like it last year. You know, he's solid, belongs on the field. He's a contributor, but he's not an anchor sort of a player. Maybe he pops this season. Would certainly be a big help. But when I look at the defense and the roster at large, I say, man, I don't know how Oregon's going to create pressure off the edge.
Yeah, I think, it could be also semantics a little bit. I think there's other guys in that outside linebacker group that it feels like they're going to be on the other side, maybe hand down, maybe on 2 feet or whatever the case may be. But when I think of edge rusher this year, the first guy that I think of is actually DJ Johnson. So I think that you're going to feel a lot of the pressure off the edge, whether it's being listed as linebacker, outside linebacker, whatever the case may be. Defensive end, I liked Swinson. I thought Brandon Swinson had a good year. And the whole situation between Dorlus, between the tackles, I totally agree with. But maybe they slide him out a little bit. I think they added a little bit of beef with their defensive tackles. I feel like they've got some guys coming up that might fill that spot a little bit. And Dorlus is a very good athlete, very light on his feet for how big he is, and he's rangy. And I think he gets a hand up. The thing that Jordan Scott talked about over and over and over during his time, and I absolutely love Jordan, is about he wanted to put more pressure on the quarterback. He was a great run stopper. Again, as a freshman, the guy was basically a freshman All-American because of his run stopping. But he wanted to get to the quarterback and pressure the quarterback more. He never really was able to. Dorlus came in right out of the gate and had a hand in the quarterback's face on numerous occasions. So it feels like it could be just a different player between the tackles. He was getting pressure. What happens if you slide him out a little bit and let him collapse the end? Now, the outside backers, though, this is where I really start to get into it because I think DJ Johnson is one of the best football players on the team. I think the guy athletically can play a lot of positions. He's incredibly big, incredibly fast. The guy came in as a good defensive end, outside backer, moved to the tight end spot during the 2020 year. I thought he was the offensive MVP as the tight end. He was absolutely clutch, crucial, had great plays. And then last year was a legitimate two-way player. I mean, how many guys are playing both ways for D1, including in the last minutes of the Ohio State game, gets a huge first down as a tight end and gets like the game-winning sack as a defensive end. I mean, this is a guy who is legitimate. He's also just getting married. The guy's got his whole life put together. The guy's looking for the next level. And I do think he's going to increase his draft stock dramatically this year with just being able to focus on one side of the ball. I think he's going to wreak havoc. And I really like him switching numbers again. He's number 2 this year. The other guy that I'm really excited for is Anthony Jones. He's the freshman. I don't see the freshman. We were talking about this earlier a little bit. I don't necessarily see the freshman playing a lot early on. I don't have huge expectations for the freshman. Anything that they give the team, I think, is great. But he's a guy who body type wise, it feels like he could play on day one. He's got that sort of build. And I don't know exactly how they're going to run this. This is kind of the exciting time of being a Duck fan right now where you've got some defensive masterminds in the building. It's just how are they going to utilize these players? And we know that there was some maybe ill utilization last year, or maybe they didn't get the most out of their players last year with the defensive side. And it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. The other guy who I absolutely love is Mace Funa. And Mace is a guy who can put a lot of pressure on a quarterback, can also hold the edge in the run game, does a really good job in space, tackles well, solo tackles well in space. And so I'm a fan. I think you're right. I think out of every, especially coming off of what we had with KT, right? It was like you absolutely, the number one guy on your entire team was at the defensive end spot. You knew exactly what you were getting, which could be a reason why Dorlus did so well, right? I mean, Dorlus definitely, I would tell that all the time to Jordan. Nobody's a bigger fan of Jordan Scott than Troy Dye. Troy Dye was the guy, one of the best linebackers of all time at Oregon, because Jordan was in front of him eating double teams all day. So the idea is, there's a lot of different options here when you're looking at offensive line, defensive line. And I really look at that idea of holding that edge. That was the first thing I really learned as a player when I played defensive end, was how difficult it is to try to really hold that edge, get the contain, don't let anybody off the outside shoulder, but also have that mentality of when I get the green light and I can go after the quarterback, I got to go 100%. So I'm really looking to see if Dorlus does move all the way out there, if he could be that next guy. But I really think that if you line it up what you thought you're going to line it up with Popo in the middle, with Dorlus on one kind of corner edge a little bit, and then DJ on the other side, I think you're in real good shape.
I think the potential for DJ Johnson is there. I'm so fascinated by the number change, and numbers seem insignificant, but to guys' mental approach and how they feel when they're stepping onto the gridiron, it matters. It's just one of those things in sports that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless you've been around sports your whole life, in which case, it makes absolutely perfect sense. I'm glad you brought up that note with KT and Dorlus, because that's kind of what I was thinking, because Dorlus was a player on the defensive line, or I think he would be, a player on the defensive line who we'd see as solid, but now we see him as NFL draft potential. But he has to show he can do it without Thibodeaux, who's eating up the double teams, who's eating up the slide protections, who's just taking all the attention. And so now that he's not there, how does Dorlus pop? Positionally, though, if he were to slide a defensive end, they have the potential to do that because they added Jordan Riley from Nebraska and, more importantly, Sam Taimani from Washington. So if you wanted to, right, do what you're saying is Dorlus maybe slim down a little bit, utilize that speed and quickness, which I agree he totally has. You slide him to defensive end. You have Taimani and Almavai in the middle with Riley backing him up. I think that could work, and I hadn't thought about that before. That's why we bring you on the show, Ryan, so you can offer some perspectives.
Well, and the other two guys I think they're going to make a difference. Jackson Powers Johnson is now focused 100% on the defensive side, and Jonah Miller slide over there too. So again, guys who are athletic enough to play both sides of the ball are guys I like. So yeah. Jackson Powers Johnson, with basically no practice, jumped in there in the bowl game and looked legitimate. The guy who really played well in high school on the defensive side and could have probably just been a defensive guy the whole time. But obviously with the Cristobal, with everything else, I think the offensive line was more of the side that he wanted to focus on. But this is a guy who I think can get after it. I think he's got a mean streak. I think he can get after it. And I'm also looking forward to see Jake Shipley, a guy who's kind of dealt with some injury. He's had some time on the field a little bit. Kristen Williams as well. Keon Hudson. I think there's guys who are gonna fill up that spot. I think there's a lot of guys in the defensive tackle room, enough to where you can slide Brandon out a little bit, and I do think that's going to benefit him. His footwork was so impressive to me. The guy was absolutely efficient. He's got a big body, but he's light on his feet, and I really like how Dorlus plays. And he's got a big mitt. He gets the hand up in the air quickly. He knocks down balls from the corner. So I'm excited. I agree with you. It's a little light. There's not that many guys there, but if they can hold out with injury, I think they can be very, very creative about how they work that middle.
Yeah, Keon Hudson is, I think, the biggest recruit of the names that you listed in there in terms of guys who were kind of waiting on his potential to be fully realized for the Ducks on the defensive line. So maybe he's somebody who pops in that situation. The thing about Dorlus putting him at the defensive end, the only concern that I would have is typically you want your defensive ends to be able to chase down a quarterback outside the pocket or make a play on a tight end catching the ball in the flat, drop him into coverage every now and then. I don't know if Dorlus can do that, but if he thins down, changes his body type a little, I think that it's possible. We just haven't seen it yet, and the room is just so unproven. It's why I wanted them to add Mitchell Agude, the transfer from UCLA. I think he would have slid in and started day one and be a high impact player as he was for the Bruins a season ago, but ultimately he decided to go to Miami.